First of all, I would like to start with an introduction of our Dean of Arts and Sciences, Rick Olson. Rick?
Right about now, he's wondering where is he? He was hiding behind the flat screen panel here. I want to welcome you to one of our favorite venues here at the college, the Spectrum Theater. We put on quite a number of productions here. If you don't get here to see them regularly, I invite you to do that. I want to use a couple quotes that are showing up in the media relative to ArtPrize, and they caught my attention as I thought about this evening's events. It's time to reboot the conversation between artists and the public. ArtPrize will be a celebration of art, design, and innovation that will bring artists and the public together like never before. And that's what tonight is all about. It's about that dialogue, the dialogue between us as an audience in our panel tonight. And I think without any further ado, because I'm sure you'd rather listen to them than to me, I want to reintroduce Nick Antonakis, who is the chair of our Visual Arts Department. Nick?
Thank you, Rick. I want to start tonight with an introduction of the artists. I'll talk a little bit about each one of them. And afterwards, they'll have 5 to 7 minutes to present their work to you. Hopefully, you'll be able to see them very well on the monitors. And after that dialogue, we'll be able to continue on with some questions for the artists, both from myself and also from the audience. So let me start, first of all, to my left, Charles Thompson. Charles grew up in Cadillac, Michigan, and Hawaii. He attended 2 years of art school at Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids, and then completed his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at the Academy of Art in San Francisco. He is currently working on a master's degree in Grand Rapids, and his ArtPrize sculpture is located on the GRCC Bostwick Commons. Second, to my left here, we have Richard Burns. He is currently, maybe I should take the microphone. I don't know, it's cutting off, right? Let's try that. Oops. Sorry about that, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Richard Burns again. He's currently a sculptor who has a studio in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He has been working on blacksmithing and timber framing for 40 years. He received his MFA degree from the University of Michigan in sculpture in 1977. His ArtPrize sculpture is located at our Heritage Restaurant patio. Third to my left, we have Fisher Stolz. And Fisher is a tenured professor at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, where he has been teaching sculpture since 1994. He received his MFA degree from the University of Georgia and also studied abroad in Cortona, Italy. He has placed work at the Hamilton train station in New Jersey and the International Terminal at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. He is a board member of Chicago Sculpture International, and his ArtPrize sculpture is located on the south end of our Bostwick Commons. And finally, Ron Pedersen. And Ron has taught sculpture for 33 years, the past 28 of them at Aquinas College, where he's also the chair of the art department. He holds an MFA in sculpture from the University of Minnesota. Ron is involved in ArtPrize, and he also exhibits regionally. His ArtPrize sculpture is located at the Cathedral Square by the Cathedral of St. Andrews. Some of his exhibits are collaborations with his wife, the poet Miriam Pedersen, and he will have a collaboration exhibit in our GRCC Collins Art Gallery in November. If we could start the presentation, and if we could start from left to right with, is that what we have set up, if that's okay? We could start with Charles and move on down the line with each panelist, and then we can ask questions.
Okay. All right, can you hear me? Good enough. My name is Charles Thompson, pretty much as Nick described. I'm not sure I'm actually qualified to be sitting with these gentlemen. I've done some sculptural work, certainly as a student and such, but most of my experience is in portraiture and mural work. Recently, taken the jump from working with overlapping montage-style imagery in murals to trying to work more dimensionally. I'm not sure I'm up to three-dimensionally yet, so much as maybe deep 2 dimensions. The piece I've got right now down on Bostwick Commons is if any of you have seen it, that's the Charlevoix Public Library, and a good example of the kind of things I was doing before. Very intentionally sort of echoing the WPA style, not that same palette. I wanted something, the room had a lot of dark woodwork in it and wanted something much brighter and richer and a little more jewel-like looking. It was actually a real piece of work. The bottom of that is 10 feet off the ground. It's a 15 by 17 foot piece on a curved wall. It was intimidating. But I really liked messing with overlapping the various images. I think it was Thomas Hart Benton when asked why he put why he preferred to work in murals. He said, because I can put more stuff in there. The bigger the image is, the more I can put in it. And that's definitely been my philosophy in painting. It has occurred to me, this is a design sketch for the piece that's down there now. It has occurred to me that rather than simply overlapping my images by my approach with the paint or with the drawing, I could actually overlap images in a much more dimensional way, and that it would give it more life, a more dynamic quality, that as you walk past it would actually move, it would actually change in relationship to where you were standing. We can keep going. The piece as it stands now, and there's my second design sketch. I threw the design sketches in just because I wanted you to see how very directly the sketches relate to exactly what I produced. I would have much preferred to have it have more depth than it does now. I think I'd really like to sort of push the envelope on what's possible there, but it was after I'd come up with my design and after I'd started the process that Nick and I agreed the piece would be freestanding outdoors, and I was a little bit concerned with fragility issues that I wouldn't have been so worried about indoors, and ended up limiting the depth more than I would have liked, enough that I think a fair amount of the imagery itself is eclipsed by things that I thought I would have floating a foot out of the painting. Again, more of a sculpture, or as much a sculpture as a painting at that stage. And to tell you the truth, I was perhaps bit off more than I could chew. I've done 18-foot murals before, but didn't anticipate that everything in the images was being painted 2 or even 3 times because of this overlapping quality. So I ran out of time, and ideally, as it stands, I would have liked to have had pieces stretching between the 2 panels, continuing to break that sense of a painting as just a rectangular image, but moving from one panel to the next. As the piece stands now, I would have the river spanning between them. Just the river itself, kind of representational of the flow of time from one piece to the next. You can see that I've put it in a rough chronological progression. Some of the people in it are meant to represent real people historically from Grand Rapids, and some of them are more allegorical, more symbolic of a group of people or people who came from this area. Anyway, so this is my first major attempt at working dimensionally, and I do intend to push it a lot further. Oh, in case anybody's curious about doing anything like that, the material I worked on is called gator foam. It's sort of an industrial version of styrofoam, or not styrofoam, foam core, like you back pictures with. Anybody who's ever actually tried, particularly students, to do anything with foam core knows what utter garbage this stuff is, but the gator foam is much more brittle. The bonded paper sandwiching it is actually much stronger and much thicker. Everything we hate about styrofoam for coffee cups, it having a half-life and being the kind of thing that 100 years from now we're going to wish we could uninvent, is actually advantageous in an art material because it's acid-free, it's inert, it isn't going to degrade on you over time. I did have to find a power tool to cut it accurately with. Worked with a roto-zip, cutting the shapes out after I'd sketched out my various designs on them.
We have Richard Burns next.
Okay, my name is Richard Burns. Can you hear me? I guess as Nick said, I have an MFA degree in sculpture from the U of M in 1977. In the early 80s, I was an artist in residence. It was a program sponsored by the Michigan Council for the Arts for Artist in Residence program. in Bloomfield Hills school system for two years in a row, and where I work with kids to develop sculpture ideas for their schools, and that involved mobiles and outdoor moving sculptures. And I probably did about 12 pieces with the kids, and some of those still exist today. At about the same time, I started a business in Ann Arbor in a kind of bohemian setting in an old boiler room in Ann Arbor called Richard Burns Sculptor. And I became a welder and blacksmith, building, you know, hundreds of railings and andirons and all kinds of stuff. Maybe we could start with some of the pictures. This picture is actually one of my last pieces at when I was at MFA. I had a outdoor courtyard that I filled with sculptures. This piece is actually a fairly tall piece, like 16 foot tall, and those weights are counterbalanced, so this thing really would move imperceptibly in the wind, and when it got really windy, it really rocked back and forth like a sailboat in a high wind. Next picture. I said I did some blacksmithing. I became pretty good at it, and I did a lot of projects, and I just have a smattering of stuff that I did. This was a sculptural screen for the law club in the U of M. And behind there, you see those andirons. Those are made by the most famous blacksmith in America, Samuel Yelland. Next picture. These are some andirons that I made for a client. I made 4 of those andirons, and they were really quite a feat to do, because there's a brass collar around those were forged out and then polished, because he didn't want any hammer marks in anything. So I had to go the extra step to polish them out, grind out the hammer marks, then go ahead and make them. But next picture. They were pretty sizable things, and I actually made 2 sets of those things, because the room that they went into was about 100 yards long with giant fireplace. You can probably, next picture, that was the fireplace that it went into. You could actually sit in that without your head hitting anything. So, and this, again, I just showed, this was a brass screen that I made for a client. Next picture. And one of my other interests is doing timber frames. Now, when I started doing the timber frames and doing the blacksmithing, I didn't per se do much artwork. What I did have a connection with a gallery in Ann Arbor called 16 Hands. And I had, over 2 years, I had 3 shows there. And I was making Calder-type mobiles. I don't show them here. They were Calder style. Of course, they're my own designs, but I really got into making mobiles for about 2 years. And one of the things I've never done, I've never documented everything I do. As I have a few documentations of a lot of the stuff that I did, but that's just the way I am. I've just recently gotten to use a digital camera, and that's helped a lot. Next picture. These are some of the timber frame shots that I've done. I've done maybe 100 different timber frames, along with a friend of mine who's an architect who lives up in Leelanau County now. But this is, go ahead, next picture. This just shows a few of the timber frames that we've done. Is something really beautiful about doing timber frames is that the structure itself is you know, it's just wood, mortise and tenon joints, and pegs. There's no steel in any of it. It's just, we use mostly white oak as the framing wood. And you can see the little tree at the peak of the frame there. That is a kind of a European idea that you put a little evergreen up there for the everlasting life of the building. Next picture. Now, another thing I do custom stuff, and I did this just recently. This is a full-size set of scissors for a tailor friend of mine. This is actually, if you looked at them, they look just like a pair of scissors. They exist on a street in Ann Arbor called State Street, and people are always going up and touching the points like they think they're real. Next picture. That just shows where it lives on the street. Some of the other things I do, besides building, I do decorative screens. This was for a recent studio that we built for a friend of ours. And I cut out these Baltic birch panels. This is Baltic birch plywood. It's 13 laminations of wood, and it's really strong. So I was able to do such an involved pattern like this without it really being weak at all. You can't break that wood. I tried as hard as I could, and you can't break it. So these are some of the panels that I've been doing recently. The thing I'm trying to get across is that a lot of the stuff that I do isn't strictly art, because it's not in an art contest, but I try to involve art in everything I do, and I've been working at this for 40 years. This is some panels that go up in the peak of that same building, and it's supposed to resemble wrought iron. When it was painted up, it looks like wrought iron up in the peak of the building. Next picture. That shows that was one of my final trees that I made there. She really was into trees, so I kind of tried to do the job on the trees. And that line kind of demarcates the root level from the upper level. And the reason I did that is so I could keep within the 4-inch parameter that you can't have a 4-inch space, anything bigger than a 4-inch space, so that allowed me to do that. Next picture. Now these are some of the ideas I have for sculptures in the future. The wind sculpture I have up in the Heritage Patio, it's one of the first things I've done in quite a while that's strictly art. But right now I'm setting up a sculptural studio with a TIG welder, a blacksmith's forge, and all kinds of cutting tools, and a good steel table. So I can start making these things in a little bit more of a, matter-of-fact way. So these are just some of the ideas I thought I'd show that are in the future for me. This is one I'm probably going to do for the next year's ArtPrize. It's going to be a 20-foot tall, probably more than 2 pieces, but it'll be 20-foot tall balancing pieces. This is one I'm going to work on in the next couple weeks. It's a steel plate, 1/2-inch steel plate with a center revolving circles that are just balanced on steel tips, so they'll turn within it. Next picture. This is the one on the left is a kinetic sound piece where that thing is cabled to the bottom of the water reservoir, and then it floats under tension, so that the rods will really sound wildly. And what I want to do is do some titanium pieces for that, like small titanium, and make them really closely set together, so that would be able to make a lot of noise. This is a piece that I have in mind that will be basically panels that balance. They'd be weighted on that part below the balance point with a heavy weight, but they'd be thick sheets, so I could hide the weight and have it highly polished so it'll really reflect the light. Next picture. This is an idea to use basically a cutout, computer cutout jig. I can use that. I have a friend who has that business, and cut that out of a solid sheet of material, and so it can balance like that. This one is really kind of related to the one I did on the Heritage Patio, just an evolved part of it. Again, same kind of things as other ideas. And that's my dog. This is my dog when he was a puppy 3 years ago. Now he's 130 pounds, and he's the most amazing dog you've ever seen. People know who Rin Tin Tin is?
I was just going to say, if you enter him next year in ArtPrize, you'll win.
He's absolutely the most amazing dog. I say, when I talk to people, they say, do you know what Rin Tin Tin looked like? Well, this dog is more handsome than Rin Tin Tin. So that's all I got to say.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. Next we have Fisher Stolz.
Hi, I'm Fisher Stolz, and I'd like to say, first of all, thank you for letting me exhibit my work, Moonbench, at the Bostwick Commons Circle. It's a wonderful site, and really appreciate that opportunity. So we'll get right into the work. Go back about a dozen years to 1997. I was in Peoria teaching. I'd only been there for about 2 or 3 years, and visited the Navy Pier for one of the sofa shows or one of the art expos. And at that time, there were some works along the Navy Pier. It was pretty exciting to see, and I said, you know, I would really like to get my work into that exhibition. It was called Pier Walk. It had just started really in 1996. That first piece was called Seduction, built in 1997. This piece, it was built in 1998, and moving from the tip of the Navy Pier down to the grounds in the front, I was trying to use some of the same elements, which are these tapered I-beams, a sphere as a focal point. This particular piece, Sphere of Influence, also has some aluminum cast balls that were done by students in a beginning sculpture class, so they actually were part of the exhibition at that time. But you can move into that space, turn the sphere on the inside, and light is supposed to filter through and kind of project back out onto the smaller balls. 1999, I'm still working in the same location on the Navy Pier. This piece was called Course of Events, and I am working with this grid pattern in addition to the I-beams and central sphere. It's kind of being pulled out of the grid from this separate element where the cable is hooked to that ball that's suspended on the inside. That was probably the largest piece, and it went to O'Hare Airport, so if you're ever in that area, go by the International Terminal. It's outside in the grounds right outside. This piece, one of my smaller pieces, I work in a number of different materials and a number of different scales. After working with the sphere for a while, I decided that I really wanted to work with a similar form, an ellipsoid, but instead of being exactly the same as it moves around, it does kind of taper to these points. That's Carrara marble, Bardilio, a gray Italian marble, and steel. It kind of defends its area. It has a feeling of a landscape in some ways. It feels a little bit like a nest. Some people see it sort of as a flag. When I was in Cortona the last time, I was there as a student in 1985, and that was actually the experience that was kind of an epiphany for me, changed my life, and I decided that really what I wanted to do was create sculpture. 20 years later, in 2005, I went back and was a faculty member teaching sculpture on that program, and this piece is called Ray. It's a piece of Carrara marble and pietra serena, a sandstone that they use for paving and architecture in town. Although it looks sort of like a ray that you might see at the bottom of the ocean, and the bottom piece of pietra serena sort of responds to the motion kind of the way sand would when the ray would move. It also has that hole in the middle, and I think the next slide will show that the piece actually floats. That hole in the middle becomes kind of like the oculus at the Pantheon, and directs light into a depression at the bottom of the base form. So I'm trying to work in both large scale, small scale, and intermediate pieces. This one is, again, using marble as one of the elements. Carrara, again. It's called Hurricane. I did this one in 2007, and it was the iron was actually cast down in Birmingham, Alabama, at the Stolz furnaces during one of the international cast iron conferences that they have every 2 years. And a friend of mine that taught down in Louisiana, in New Orleans, was talking about some of the terrible things that he'd been through in that. And while I was making my iron piece, I really didn't have a direction to begin with, but ended up separating out these forms that I cast, kind of creating that swirling pattern that the hurricane makes, and then I have this central form that begins to create little ripples on the surface, kind of culminating in a seventh wave, as seventh waves are supposed to be the largest and most dominant. The eye of the hurricane becomes sort of a fish-like form that, or a vortex, and this piece is kind of moving through that space. Well, one of the advantages of being in Peoria, Illinois is Caterpillar, the headquarters, are located there. And they have a number of plants for different types of manufacturing. And they asked me to do a piece collaborating with their foundry there, where they do their engine blocks. And so although I've worked with the figure mostly in my training, I thought for this particular spot, something that the iron workers would see every day, and talking with the people involved in the project, that what we would do is cast a large figure of Vulcan, the god of fire and iron. And so we did. That's I guess that was about 6 pieces that excuse me, are put together to form the figure. It weighed about 7,000 pounds in iron when it was done. But in addition to that, trying to incorporate some of the other elements that I use, particularly my large-scale pieces, so you can see that kind of grid arc form coming in. And the piece also functions as a fountain. It has a continuous pour that comes out of that ladle, and a light that reflects on it in the evening that's red, so it looks like it's molten iron as it's being poured. This is a detail of a piece called New Era. I'm not sure if my slides are going to be exactly in the right order, but the detail of this particular part of the sculpture was something that I enjoyed. It interested me, and I thought, well, I'm going to pick up on that that theme and work it into a piece with some slightly different parts to it, some changes in the arcs and the sphere. But it's a granite bench, a spun aluminum sphere, and steel beams. We'll see what comes up. Yeah. So here's the moon bench, and you can see where that idea came from. The way that it's been changed is the beams that were fabricated before in a straight fashion are now fabricated with an arc in there, and they're topped with marble from Colorado. And the sphere has changed from a spun aluminum to a solid ball of marble set off kind of like a gemstone in this granite bench. And it's kind of a romantic piece in a way. It's an area for a couple of people to be able to sit together, and sort of the idea of, I'll lasso the moon and bring it down for you, that sort of a thing is kind of the way that the concept works. And there it is in the evening in an indoor setting with the light shining up on the bottom of the moon. Let's see if we have anything else. Okay.
Fisher. And Ron Pedersen next.
Okay, I'd also like to thank Nick for inviting me to participate here. And I think the reason I'm included has partly to do with the fact that I'm going to be here. My wife and I will be showing in November. Before I start my slides, I would just like to say that it's enjoyable to see the slides that you guys have shown, and to think about how your ideas evolve, over time, and kind of find their way into your work. And you can go ahead and start. I wanted to show just about, 6 or 7 slides that end with the ones that I'm showing at ArtPrize, but also will give a bit of a preview of what I'll be showing here in November. And I've been making sculpture seriously for 40 years. I'm of the same era as Rick. I graduated in 1977 from the University of Minnesota. And so this would be something, it's an armature, you can show the next slide, of a cement piece that I did probably 35 years ago. And it's just, I want to sort of talk to you about where ideas come from. You can just keep on going. You can stop here with this one. This isn't me, I just took it off the internet. There's kind of an impetus and kind of an instinct in a lot of my work that reminds me of a potter, kind of coloring in something at the neck that all of a sudden causes it to refer to humans, to the part that isn't colored in then ends up starting to function as a head. You can go next. And so this is a piece that I never did cast because I didn't quite like the proportions, but I like the idea. If you could go back to that last one a second. It's just, it was a piece of heavy cardboard that was saturated with water, and then I just used a rope to cinch it in, and I liked the accidental folds that happened that I couldn't predict. I didn't ever end up casting it because I ended up painting it with wax. You can see the wax there. But I didn't like the proportions, so I didn't cast that one. Now you can go to the next one. And this is one that was started similarly, and I ended up casting this one in iron while I was a graduate student, so it tells you how long ago that was. But from time to time, I'm just showing you a small fragment of the work I've done, and just one of the ideas. I've done a lot of very different work, but the work that I tend to do collaboratively with my wife is figurative because it's easier to connect with the poems that she writes. If you could keep going. Now this is one that I started the same way. I started this one with wire. This is made out of plaster, and it's about maybe 3 or 4 feet, 3 feet tall probably. And I sort of did the same thing, starting with wire with expanded metal lath, and just necked it in, and then I started covering it with plaster and saw a profile, and that's when it became more overtly human. And go next. And this is something similar, although at this point I knew that I was going to be going, even at the start, I knew that I was going to start carving it. This is probably about 4 feet tall, and this one will be in the exhibit. It's called The Three Graces, and I can explain, maybe I should explain a little bit about the collaborative process. My wife and I have worked collaboratively since 1989, and I usually start the piece and just sort of see where it's going. Then she writes a poem, not a poem to explain the piece, but a poem to respond to the piece. And then I might respond to her poem almost as if it's a conversation. A conversation involves response and counter-response and counter-response and so on. You don't simply repeat each other. So in our conversations, we don't try to either explain the sculpture or illustrate the poem. We just use sculpture and poetry to have a conversation. And in this case, she part of the reason I split it into, there are 3 heads in it, had to do with how she responded to it poetically. Okay, next. This is the first piece of the 3 that I'm showing down at Cathedral Square, and this is probably about 7 feet tall, made out of fiberglass, and it's that same method of necking it in, only this was made out of hardware cloth, and I used an industrial sort of ratcheting strap to neck that in. You can go to the next slide. And you can see the kind of accidental marks that happened when I did that, and I like that. And then this piece is called A Crown, and she wrote a poem that ended up being called A Crown about a ruler, and then her poem caused me to put that gold leaf right at the top of it. So that's kind of a little bit how the collaboration worked. And this one is a little bit taller than that, called The Seeker. And there's a reference in one of the poems that she wrote, or the poem that she wrote in response to this, that talks about searching for a patch of green, and that the main effect it had on me was that it suggested that I put a greenish patina on it. Now that slide ends up making it look a little bit greener than it actually is, but that's how that worked. And then the next one, or keep going, that's just a different view. Okay, this one, I think I'll end with this one, but I would like to read a poem that she wrote to this, in response to this. This is called Becoming, and this one is maybe 11 feet tall. Yeah, maybe, I don't think I can jump and touch the top of it. Yeah, so it must be 11. But it's made out of fencing material, not hardware cloth, but fencing material, and you can see the grid through it. And she wrote a poem having to do with networks. And so I'm just going to finish by reading the poem she wrote. The poem is called Becoming. In the folds of each day, someone waits to enter your life, to appear in person or in a dream and change you slightly, as if a pencil sketch were being drawn of you, and a line extended or erased increases your vitality, your presence in the world. Be ready for the entrance of a stranger or a friend who, after an exchange, lingers in the form of words, a look, a gesture, new filaments joining your own, becoming you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you to all of our panelists. I enjoyed viewing your work and how it has evolved over time. I have a couple of questions prepared that I'd like to hear from the panelists first, and maybe we can open it up to the audience for more questions if we have time. So maybe we can start by answering from my left to the right, and if you'd like to say something, that would be great. We saw a variety of materials being used and very enjoyable forms being created and being involved. I'm just wondering if you as sculptors feel compelled to use green materials and or consider the impact of the materials you use on the environment. Charlie?
It has crossed my mind, particularly dealing with a material that is essentially styrofoam. I don't know, I guess I think it's sort of, at least in my case and with the way I'm working, it's sort of at, the idea of working with green materials is sort of at odds with needing a permanent material. One of the reasons I gravitated toward this particular surface was that it was malleable. I could cut it in, and I was excited as I worked to increasingly discover how delicately I could cut it. I could certainly do a lot more than I did do. And that the idea of working green is sort of at odds with the idea of wanting a permanent material, of working with something that wouldn't degrade and break down over time. It's a balance I think I'm not too comfortable with right now. Certainly you're considered unprofessional to work with material, to work or sell a piece that is not permanent. But then permanence also implies that if someday that piece, God forbid, becomes trash, that it will continue to exist long after the people who have it want it to exist. So I don't really know where the balance, at least as I'm working, I don't know where the balance is for that, and it isn't a material that could comfortably be recycled. So if anybody has a better idea for something I could work on that way, do let me know. It was one of the prime reason for choosing that particular material was its lightweight factor. Being malleable and really lightweight, I had anticipated having to maybe hang it on drywall, and it could certainly be hung on drywall. And it, they're 4 by 6 foot panels with multiple layers, and I could not think of anything else that I could work with that would take paint and be lightweight enough to move easily. You can lift one of those panels easily by yourself and hang it on drywall.
As far as green materials, I'm a builder, and I really do I like to see building going towards green materials. Doing the timber frames, I consider that to be a fairly green material because it's for the long, long term. You build a timber frame building, it will be there for hundreds of years, barring, fire or whatever. So as far as using green materials in my sculpture work, I'm all for it. I don't know if aluminum is considered green or stainless steel is considered green, since I don't know how that works. It's kind of a highly processed thing. But in the future, I hope to do some things with green materials more per se in my artwork.
Well, I do use some recycled materials like steel from junkyards. And I've also done pieces with recycled materials from other sculptors. For instance, at Western Michigan, Robert Stackhouse did a piece called Michigan Swell that lasted for a few years. And then when it came down, I reused those poles to build kind of a shelter for him called Stackhouse. And it's there now, in case you're in Kalamazoo. But really, I think that I'm kind of closer to the trunk of the tree, and as a traditional sculptor. For up until maybe the 20th century or so, sculpture was pretty much dominated by the figure in bronze and in stone. In the 20th century, abstraction became an option. Steel became something that was widely used, and I don't believe that that avenue has been exhausted yet, and so I still feel like that's where my voice is at this point.
I would echo some of what Fisher just said, and I also want to give credit to Ron Stein, because you gave us a preview about 10 minutes before the panel about what the question would be, and I have to admit that I hadn't really thought about it all that much, but I work with steel. I not only buy used pieces of steel from the junkyard because they're more interesting than new steel, but what I don't use, I recycle to the junkyard. And other materials that I use, plaster, clay, are also recyclable. For example, plaster, that when you wash out your plaster buckets, as an example, what settles in the settling tanks then can be dried out and put into the ground, and some gardeners like that. In fact, I saw one of them come in earlier. Mary Ellen McNaughton used to take some of the plaster and put in her garden. And so, I mean, I'm all for it, but I can't claim great sophistication, but I think it's basically kind of classic sculptural materials, that are. I have to say, I'm probably not ever going to do fiberglass sculpture again, because it is just miserable stuff. You have to do it outside and on a windy day, and then the people who are downwind complain, and so I don't think I'm going to use it again. It's wonderful stuff, and it's miserable stuff.
Thank you. Let me ask one more question. I think I'll combine a couple of them that I have here into one, and then we can open it up to the audience. Given ArtPrize and all the venues that we had to consider as artists, what do you consider essential in a venue for your work? You probably planned that out to begin with when you formulate an idea. Can you talk a little bit about that process and maybe even tie it to the venues for ArtPrize in some way? Charlie.
When I first heard about the contest, I had intended from the start that I would, the piece I was at that point just thinking about would be on a school campus somewhere. It just seemed to suit my goals, suit the kind of work I wanted to do. I honestly was less interested in, I mean, who'd sneeze at $250,000, but I was less interested in the possibility of the prize money than in broadening my market, than in maybe showing the kind of work I have done or would like to be doing in Grand Rapids. At the same time, Ron said some really interesting things about creating a dialogue. And yesterday I had to meet a news crew down in front of my piece, and they were running late. They'd been pulled over on their way down from Cadillac. And I sat on a bench there in Bostwick Commons sipping my coffee, and it was entirely too cold to be comfortable, but it was a fascinating experience. I've never actually had the experience of sitting for a prolonged period and observing people, observing my work without actually interacting with them. I mean, it's a very different thing when somebody comes and looks at what you're doing and asks you questions about it, and to simply sit back and watch the students walking by, watch who noticed it and who didn't, who felt obligated to stop there and stand and think it through for a little while and look at the details. And I was particularly amused when people would walk by, notice it, and their head would stay on it as their body kept going, to the point where they were turning around and looking backwards as they walked by. And it was informative. I mean, it was, in a lot of ways, that dialogue you imagine in your head you're having with the people who observe your work, but are never really entirely sure. And sure, there were people who stopped and pointed and made fun, and I can live with that. But it was really instructive, and very much related to my wanting to put a piece up on a campus with students, because my piece is definitely a piece that is about wanting to show people something of the history of Grand Rapids. I mean, I lived here for a few years and had no idea that there used to be islands downtown, that kind of thing. And I mean, as far as it relates to the prize money, just wasn't all that concerned. Wasn't my priority at all.
As far as the venue, my sculptures, I tend to make sculptures that respond to the environment. So consequently, I had to have a venue where wind was going to be an option. And we did have a pretty good wind on Sunday and Monday, and I wish I would have seen my piece there. During that time, I tried to go to the restaurant to see if they had seen it, but nobody really had any idea about it. And so I guess nobody saw it, but it must have been rocking and rolling pretty good. But basically, I kind of evolved my sculptural ideas for the idea that they move. I kind of get, my inspiration comes from nature. And the idea that I feel like my sculpture is successful if I can get it to move in response to the wind and move like grass, or move like something that is just imperceptibly moving over just any little breeze. So I picked that venue because it had a good outdoor spot on its second story, and it had a really nice feel that was going to be isolated there and shown off. So I like the venue I picked, and in the future, if the ArtPrize goes on next time, I'll try to pick something that's even more public and maybe a little bigger, so I can pick a spot that it doesn't have to be so protected. It can be up in the air and do its wild thing.
I would prefer, as I think probably most artists would, to have a specific site in mind, location already determined when the idea is developed. Doesn't always happen. I still will make work without a venue predetermined. But in the ArtPrize venue selection process, I went through with the filter to go outdoor and electrical, and then I started looking at the images that were available in a number of venues. I'm looking for a place that was fairly level. The Bostwick Circle was particularly appealing to me because of the circle itself and the way that it kind of radiates. The moon bench has a fair amount of geometry in the design there. When that piece was designed, a number of the arcs were relative to one another in different ways, maybe played around in space. But that particular spot had a radius to the circle that corresponded with the curve in the moon bench. So it worked out really well for me.
I actually wasn't going to be in ArtPrize at all. I was out of the country when it was announced, and so when I came back into the country in mid-May, everybody was asking me, "What are you going to do about ArtPrize?" And I said, "What?" You know, and I ended up getting asked by the diocese, because I teach sculpture at Aquinas, if I would be their consultant for ArtPrize, and I agreed to do that, partly because I wanted our college to have a good relationship with the diocese, and in that process, they asked me if I'd be interested in showing, and so I was able to look at the venue very well, and it's a wonderful kind of landscaped setting that's very quiet and contemplative, perfect for looking at the sculpture and considering the poetry while looking. So I'm very pleased with that, and I think I would be, I'd rather die than have my work at the Bob. You know, it's just way, it's just way too frenzied there.
That might be a perfect segue to maybe a question from the audience, or a couple of questions. We have at least 5 minutes left. So do we have the wireless mic that we can walk around? Let's see if anybody has a question. There is no easy way down. It's a bigger jump. Anybody with a question?
Hi, my name is Lily. My question is for Fisher Stolz. I see that a lot of your sculptures are very colossal, which is pretty cool. But I wanted to know, do you have a team working with you, gathering materials and helping you put these things together and transporting them from your studio or whatnot to the location where it's going to be placed?
Well, with my large-scale pieces, really for the most part, I fabricate them alone. Sometimes for particular aspects at particular times, I've been able to use another source. The polished granite edge on the moon bench, for instance, was done by a company that does that sort of work, granite countertops and things like that. So they have great equipment for it. And while I was working on a different part, they were able to do that for me. Sometimes I will, particularly when it comes time to set a piece up, I'll ask any of my students if they'd be interested in driving to Chicago and helping me set up on the Navy Pier, and we'll go out for a nice meal afterwards or something like that. And I did have help setting up the moon bench with the kind of crane that I've built that fits on my trailer. I can do most of the lifting, but it's still handy to have another set of hands available. And sometimes on other locations, if I know that there's going to be a crew there or a crane there, then I can kind of plan appropriately for that.
Time for another one?
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. I know three of you have worked with metals before, and I just wondered if, when you say the word iron, do you mean steel or do you mean cast iron? Do you mean wrought iron? There's you know, several categories here. And why not Corten, which kind of oxidizes to a limit and holds its color? You don't have to worry about it falling apart. And they're stainless, and I see you have stainless in some of your pieces and so on. Is there a reason why you choose iron rather than bronze or anything else? Any questions about the choice of material that you use?
Well, I'll just quickly say mild steel is the easiest for me to work with, you know, with kind of it's a low-tech material. And I love the way it deteriorates, you know, when I find it in the junkyard. I love, it's sort of like, it's easier to start a drawing if you're starting with a scribble or a doodle than if you're facing a blank page, you know. And so it's for me, it's easier to start a sculpture by responding to interesting found forms, you know. So that's just a personal choice, a lifetime habit of working with mild steel found in the junkyard.
Well, I'll use different materials for different reasons. Sometimes it's color, sometimes it is the, you know, like the tensile strength or something like that. With cast iron, it's generally broken down engine parts and radiators, things like that. It's inexpensive compared to bronze, which we have a foundry at Bradley and we cast bronze and aluminum, but it's exciting to cast iron. Instead of a furnace which is maybe, you know, set in the floor and has a crucible inside of it, you actually build a freestanding cupola and melt the iron with coke in that furnace. And I know a lot of sculptors. Minnesota is well known for casting iron. They've been doing it for a long time. I think Wayne Potratz has been there. We've recently built our own cupola at Bradley after a number of years visiting and pouring. So I think when I use iron, it's because I have the ability to cast it into particular forms rather than try to fabricate it in steel.
I guess I tend to use aluminum and stainless steel in my work, but I have used iron and steel. I mean, iron is kind of like a catch-all nameplate. It could be cast, it could be mild steel, or, you know, that's the kind of, it has kind of, people say iron, they kind of have that as not a specific thing. But I tend to use aluminum and stainless steel because I like the look of it and the permanence of it. Steel, I think, would be a good candidate, but I kind of would shy away from just using raw steel where it would rust. I don't know, it's just a particular thing of mine. I'd probably paint it.
Thank you. Before we finish the evening tonight, I'd like to invite everybody to a small reception in the lobby of our theater so we can enjoy talking to the artists. So without further ado, I'd like to thank our panelists, Ron Pedersen, Fisher Stolz, Richard Burns, and Charlie Thompson. Thank you very much.